Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there. Welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. Today I want to talk about whether or not Sandplay therapy is effective based on what we've seen in the research, and also how that applies to play therapy. To do that, we need to really understand terminology and concepts. So I thought it was also a really good opportunity to clarify the difference between Sandplay therapy and Sandtray therapy, because often what I notice is we use those words interchangeably and they're not interchangeably. In the same way as play therapists, we tend to use art therapy interchangeably with using art and play therapy or music therapy or any of these other expressive arts. And we really need to understand and think about the terms that we're using and what that communicates, because there are differences. In the same way as play therapists, we're really protective about that term play therapy, because play therapy is different than pulling out games and toys and using an adult psychotherapy model to get children to talk. So I think it's really important that we are aware of the terminology, that we understand the difference with the terminology that we're using. And because I wanted to highlight this study and the results of the study, it also means that we need to clarify the terminology that we're using and what that means for the results of the study, especially if we are going to apply it in the play therapy arena. If you're a therapist who uses other expressive arts modalities as well, then it's important for all of us to understand the difference of in the terminology and what exactly does that mean for the services that we're providing. So let's get started for today. So I would love to know who's watching today. If you're watching the live version of this broadcast, I would love to know who's here. Post your name in the comments, what population you work with, what modalities do you use? Are you a play therapist? Are you an expressive arts therapist? What modalities are you using? What population do you work with? So I'm Cathi Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist supervisor, and I have been working with children and adolescents in a variety of capacities, including special education as a special education teacher for ED children. I still use that experience and knowledge that I gained way back in my bachelor's program back in the 1980s. So I've been working with children, adolescents, and families for a really long time. And what I really like to do now is engage that teacher side of me and kind of talk about some of these issues and how do these apply to our profession. So I would love to hear from you guys. The only thing that I would ask is that you not post specific questions about clients. This is a public format, so we want to make sure to maintain that privacy for our clients, but feel free to Post questions, happy to engage in that conversation. If you're watching the replay, please feel free to also post your name and comments. I love to know who's watching. Post your feedback. If you're listening to the podcast version, then I would also love your feedback. Please leave a review. Please feel free to reach out to me. And let's get started for today. So today I want to talk about Sandplay therapy and some research about its effectiveness and highlight some things that I think are important for those of us working with children, adolescents, and families, and those of us in the play therapy arena. I'm going to talk about a training that I have coming up because I think it also kind of highlights what we're talking about in this live stream podcast episode today. And that is my in-person training that I have coming up using a neuroscience and attachment lens with Sandplay in play therapy. And you'll notice I said Sandplay, not Sandplay. And I am going to chat about that a little bit today. So let's get started. First and foremost, the topic that we're talking about today is Sandplay therapy effective? To really understand the results of the study and also its application to the work that we're doing in real time with our clients, we really need to clarify terms. So, what's the difference between Sandplay therapy and Sandplay therapy? So, both of them have their roots in the work of Margaret Lowenfeld and her sand world technique, but they go different directions from there. So it's really important to understand those differences. So because this influences how you're communicating to others and what you are communicating about what you are doing to others. Keep in mind that the clients that we serve, this isn't their profession. It isn't their everyday life unless they're in the profession, because those of us in the profession, we know that we go to therapy as well. We take our kids to therapy because we want to engage in the benefits of that. The vast majority of our clients are not in the mental health field, so they're not necessarily going to understand the difference. But one of the things I've heard often, especially from people over the years in my Play Therapy Academy. So Play Therapy Academy is my online play therapy consultation program. If you're interested in that, you can pop over to my website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. I do have one opening. I expect that to fill up fast, but feel free to ask me about that as well. So one of the things that I hear pretty regularly is they'll have clients who come to them and say, oh, I got this kind of therapy. Like, oh, I got child-centered play therapy and I was in the session with my child. So they're kind of expecting that's what's going to happen. The problem is just by the fact that they said they were in the session, if you're a trained play therapist and you're trained in child-centered play therapy, you know they didn't get child-centered play therapy. So it kind of sets you up to be in an awkward position as you're kind of explaining to clients, oh, okay, well, actually, child-centered play therapy is applied this way, so here's how I do it. And then you go on from there. It kind of sets up some confusion. So when we are using the terms that we're using, it's really important for us to understand those differences. Sandplay therapy has its roots in the work of Carl Jung. It has its roots in Jungian therapy. It's based on the work of Dora Kolff, who took trained with Margaret Lowenfeld, and then Dorokoff applied a Jungian lens. So it's going to go a slightly different way from there based on that theoretical model that's being used. So in Sandplay therapy based in Jungian theory is non-directive and non-interpretive. And the non-interpretive, because I've been doing trainings for a very long time, and I've done a lot of training in people that I've done a lot of trainings with people who have roots more in a Jungian framework, and then they've kind of integrated other things. But my initial training had a lot of roots in Sandplay. That being said, because that's not my ongoing training, I don't refer to myself as a Sandplay therapist because I haven't gone through all of the extensive training required for that. So I refer to myself as a Sandtray therapist. So what then is a Sandtray therapist? I use Sandtray therapy in play therapy. So Sandtray therapy is a more general term, and it's more general because the type of theory model that you're using when you're using the sand tray and the miniatures, it's going to be applied. The way you use it is going to be applied based on whatever theoretical model you're using. Now, most of us even use more of an integrated approach. But here's the thing, like I had this conversation with another person recently. Once we get in the field for a while, maybe we're 10, 15, 20, 30 years like me, we start saying things like, well, theory doesn't matter because in the real world, when you're working with clients, we just do what works. And my response back to that is, well, you've been using those interventions you're using, you use them based on a theory model. So you've integrated them, but they're still based on a theoretical model. You've just had more practice using them based on that theoretical model than maybe somebody who's brand new. So it's more natural. So my point here that I'm making is, even though you're using an integrated approach, which most of us do, it's still based on a theoretical model. And the way that we're applying it is based on that theoretical model. So Sandtray therapy, Sandtray in play therapy, that's what I usually say. Like for my training that I have coming up, using a neuroscience and attachment lens with Sandtray in play therapy. What I'm communicating there is I tend to use a neuroscience and attachment lens when, as part of my integrated approach, when I'm using Sandtray therapy. And so in the training, that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. We're going to be looking at how are you using Sandtray in play therapy with a neuroscience and attachment theoretical lens. What does that look like when you're using the Sandtray in play therapy? So, is it tomatoes or tomatoes? I would say no. I would say it's apples and oranges. So apples being Sandplay therapy and oranges being Sandtray therapy. They're in the same fruit category. They're different types of fruit. That's what I would say about that. So let's get into the study. Usually, whenever I'm preparing a training, I always like to go and see what the research says. And in preparation for this particular training that I have coming up, using a neuroscience and attachment lens with Sandtray and play therapy, I wanted to go a little deeper. So I've done this training before, and I really wanted to expand it and go in a little more in depth, because I like my Sandtray trainings to be small, where we have more of a kind of a opportunity for more interaction. We get our hands in the sand. I really like it to be a little bit kind of retreat-like in that way. So in order to do that, I wanted to do a deeper dive. And in doing a deeper dive, I always like to look and see what the research says, because I also like my trainings to be up to date with what we're learning from the research studies. So I found this really interesting study in the International Journal of Play Therapy. So for those of you who are interested in reading more about this study, you can look it up in the description. I cited the study in the description, so you can find that and look it up. So for those of you who are members of the Association for Play Therapy and you get the International Journal of Play Therapy, it is the October 2022 issue of the International Journal of Play Therapy. So the title of the study is a meta-analysis of Sandplay therapy treatment outcomes. And so the purpose of the study is they wanted to analyze 40 quantitative studies of Sandplay treatment, which meant they had, with those 40 studies that represented 1,284 participants from 8 countries, to evaluate the effectiveness of Sandplay therapy as a treatment approach for children and adults who had a wide variety of mental health issues. And what I liked about this study is a couple of things. One, it had since it's a meta-analysis, it's kind of looking at the results of a lot of different studies. I always like looking at the meta-analysis. And it also represented studies from 8 different countries, had a pretty good population size of 1,284 participants, and it looked at a wide variety of mental health issues for children and adults. And so here's what the researchers found. What they did is they used a few different measures to evaluate the outcomes of the data, evaluating 3 domains of behavior. So they looked at internalizing behavior, which they identified as things like anxiety, depression, self-concept, and somatic symptoms. Those were the internalizing behaviors. And then they looked at externalizing behaviors, which they identified as things like social interactions, parent-child relationships, aggressive behavior, and defiance. And then they also looked at characteristics, symptoms of ADHD, and the characteristics of ADHD that they looked at were things like hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention. And so there were some studies that included both internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So those were still included. And then the data collected went in, they looked at the study and kind of extrapolated specific types of either internalizing or externalizing, and they looked at the specific data for those. So they did include those in the study. So here's what the results found. They found that Sandplay therapy was effective to address a wide variety of mental health issues for children and adolescents based on the data. And what they also found was also interesting, which was clinical outcomes. So positive outcomes and improvements were found in as little as 10 sessions. But they also looked at the effectiveness of Sandplay was found to increase over time. So the more sessions that were provided, there was also improvement to be found, but not statistically significant. So what the authors of the study kind of hypothesized about that, so to speak. They proposed that the more sessions that were done allowed a deeper level of healing, but wasn't able to measure that. And that's one of the problems we find in some of the mental health research is it's really hard to define and quantify some of the outcomes such as this, because we kind of intuitively know as therapists, and we know, like, because we're kind of the hands-on, boots on the ground, that's where you have research and then you have practical application. And how do you kind of work with those in a way that the research can be effective? Because we say all the time there's research and then there's practical application, and trying to kind of marry those two together, so to speak, can be challenging. But what the authors proposed, and what I think most of us have experienced, is that the more sessions, more than 10 sessions, allows you to go to a much deeper level, because the more you're able to do that, you have to build the trust, because we're asking people to be vulnerable. So we have to build that trust and allow them to go in a deeper level. That being said, if you are in a setting where you get a limited number of sessions, like maybe you only get 20 sessions or even less than that, it's kind of encouraging, not kind of, it is encouraging, based on this study of where they did a meta-analysis, that you could see positive improvements in as little as 10 sessions. So even if you don't have a longer period of time, there's still benefit to be able to use Sandplay with children and adults who are experiencing a wide variety of mental health issues. So how does this apply when you're using Sandplay my mouth's not working today. How does this apply when you're using Sandplay in play therapy? So to me, it really does highlight the importance of understanding theory drives application. So you're gonna, if you're using Sandplay in play therapy, what theoretical model are you using? Even if you're using an integrated approach, how is the way in which you're using it based on some of the theoretical application of the theories that you're using, and then how are you integrating them together? And it's important to keep that in mind, because in Sandplay therapy, which is what the study is based on, they looked at studies where there was adherence to Sandplay therapy, which means they're going to use non-directive and non-interpretive. So they're not going to be leading the discussion. They're not going to be providing like feedback about meaning. They're not doing any of that. And that being said, they still found improvement. So if you're using Sandplay therapy, what theoretical models are you using where you're integrating that with the play therapy approach that you're using with your clients? And that part's really important, because what I find a lot of times is that people who aren't taking that time early to learn a theoretical model, then what happens is you kind of get lost in the process. So somewhere in the treatment process, and usually the middle stage, you get a little lost. You start feeling like, uh-oh, it's not working. And maybe you feel a little internal pressure on yourself to prove that this play therapy thing works. And then you start kind of throwing together lots of different approach, I always say that's a lot like throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks. But is that really as effective as if you're using an intentional approach with the models that you're using, even when you're using the sand, the sand tray, and the miniatures? So there's a really good quote in this research article that I wanted to read because I think it kind of sums things up really well. So the authors of the study hypothesized that sand tray therapy was effective because, and here's the reason, I'm going to read this quote. The consistent effectiveness of Sandplay therapy across domains in the present analysis might lie in its multisensory, symbolic, less verbal, and actively experiential approach. There are several advantages that Sandplay may have over traditional talk therapy to effectively treat more diverse populations. Sandplay appears to lower the threshold for the initiation of psychotherapy and provides people that have barriers of verbal expression a safe, direct, and contained means to access and work through difficulties. And that's a direct quote from the article. So that, to me, I also like that quote because it kind of got into the neuroscience-y part, which then to me leads to attachment in the approach that I like to use with sand tray when I'm working in Sandplay. It's, if I'm using child-centered play therapy, then I will stick with the child-centered play therapy model, even if the child chooses to use the sand tray. If I'm using a different approach, then I'm usually integrating in using more of a neuroscience and attachment lens, and I say Jungian informed approach. So the same principles are true when you're using sand tray. Like I just kind of gave an example of, even I use an integrated approach, but it's based on these theoretical models. And so the way in which I apply the model is going to be based on these theories. And I'm going to be conceptualizing the problem and why the problem is happening based on those theoretical lenses, and also helping me to understand where the client is in the change process and what does that look like in each stage of the change process based on these theoretical models. So that is it for today. Let me just do a quick little recap. The topic today that we're talking about is Sandplay therapy effective? And it's really important to understand terminology and concepts, especially because it influences, and I would say theory drives application. So understanding Sandplay therapy is based on a Jungian theoretical model, and the way it's applied in sessions through all the stages of change will be non-directive and non-interpretive. And then sand tray therapy is more of a general term. So the way you use sand tray therapy will be based on the models that you're using with the sand tray, and the miniatures, because it's going to be directive and non-directive. So it might be a little child or client led, and it might be a little therapist led. You may choose to do some interpretation, and it's going to be based on your theoretical model, because it's going to influence, your theoretical model is going to influence the way in which you show up, what you say, what you don't say, how you say it, when you say it, what that looks like when you say it. It's going to influence all of these things. So it's really important to understand those differences. And with the results of this study analyzed 20 quantitative studies. So it was a meta-analysis looking at, 40 my mouth's not working today. It's a meta-analysis looking at 40 quantitative studies that included a total number of participants of 1,284 people from 8 different countries who were exhibiting a wide variety of mental health issues. And that what they found is that Sandplay therapy is an effective model, and change can be accomplished. Improvement can be accomplished in as little as 10 sessions. It can be more than that, and as therapists, we tend to go more than that, to go deeper. So they did find that more sessions did demonstrate positive outcomes, like more improvements for the client, but it wasn't statistically significant. And the authors of the study kind of proposed that had to do with it's difficult to measure when you get into that deeper level of change. So how does this apply to Sandplay in play therapy? When you're using Sandplay in play therapy, you want to make sure that you're grounding the work that you're doing in a theoretical model. Even when you're integrating theoretical models, make sure that you are understanding how each of those models are applied. How do those models understand the problem? And how do those models guide you through each stage of the change process? When you're integrating that, you're still using a framework to get you through each stage of change based on the theoretical model that you're using. So it's not just kind of, thrown together and fly by the seat of your pants, so to speak. It's grounded in the theories that you are integrating. So that is it for today, and I will see you again next week. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.